So I want you to uh, imagine dropping $750 million on like a fleet of luxury, high-performance sports cars.
Oh, man. Okay. That's a good weekend.
Right. You park them in your massive garage. You are feeling pretty good about the deal you just struck. But a month later, the alternator goes out on one of them.
Which happens. Sure.
Yeah, normal car stuff. So you call the manufacturer to order a replacement part, only to discover they went completely bankrupt yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Like, the factory has been leveled. The blueprints are locked in a vault somewhere in Europe. The spare parts simply do not exist anywhere, and you're the only person on the entire planet driving these specific cars.
That is a terrifying scenario for a mechanic.
It is. And now I want you to take those cars, make them weigh 2,500 tons, and put them at the bottom of the freezing high-pressure environment of the North Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, that drastically raises the stakes.
That absolute logistical nightmare is the exact reality that Canadian Navy has been living with for the last 25 years.
You are basically describing a massive, complex machine operating in literally the most unforgiving environment on Earth, and it's stripped of the one thing that keeps modern militaries functioning,
Which is?
a supply chain. Without a supply chain, you don't have a Navy, you have a museum exhibit.
And that is exactly where we are starting today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking one of the most, staggering, complex, and high-stakes military shifts in modern Canadian history.
It really is massive.
It's the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project, or the CPSP. And to do this, we've pulled a massive stack of intelligence for you.
Yeah, we have a really eclectic mix of sources today.
We do. We are looking at official government blueprints, specifically the Victoria-class modernization document. We also have this highly detailed force development policy report from the CDA Institute.
Which is incredibly dense but super revealing.
Very dense. We're also pulling analysis from a recent hard-hitting CTV News investigation, some really specific July 2026 updates from the Maple Leaf Navy magazine, some historical logs from Wikipedia, and honestly my favorite part, a fiercely debated, incredibly granular thread from the Defense HUD Global Military Forum.
It is a remarkable cross-section of data, honestly.
Yeah.
You are looking at, polished government procurement strategies on one end, and then anonymous internet naval specialists literally deconstructing the molecular properties of submarine hulls on the other.
When you look at this thread from Defense Hub, it is wild. You have armchair admirals accidentally debunking 30-year-old Wikipedia myths about nuclear treaties in real time.
It's open source intelligence at its most chaotic, yeah.
And we need all these perspectives because on July 6, 2026, Canada made this monumental announcement. They named Germany's TKMS Thyssenkrupp Marine Systems as the preferred supplier for a fleet of up to 12 brand new submarines.
Which is just a staggering investment.
We are talking about a budget hovering somewhere between $60 and $100 billion.
Yeah, it's a fundamental tectonic shift in a nation's entire naval posture.
But, to really understand the fierce rivalry with South Korea's Hanwha Ocean to win this contract, and the profound philosophical identity crisis this triggers for the Canadian Navy, we have to look at the cautionary tale of what they are currently driving.
Right, the ghosts of submarines past.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the Victoria class.
Yeah, if you want to understand the sheer anxiety surrounding this new $100 billion procurement, you really have to dissect the legacy fleet. It is basically a masterclass in the dangers of opportunistic military acquisitions.
Because according to the historical logs we pulled, these submarines weren't even built for Canada.
No, not at all.
The UK built them in the 1980s. They were originally called the Upholder class, right?
Exactly. So in the late 1970s, the UK Ministry of Defense recognized a gap. They had a powerful fleet of nuclear submarines. But nuclear subs are incredibly expensive to operate, especially in shallow coastal waters.
They're just too big, right?
Too big, too expensive. So they wanted a highly capable, cost-effective diesel-electric submarine to supplement the nuclear fleet. Mainly for coastal defense, hunting Soviet subs in the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, and, for training purposes.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so they went to Vickers Shipbuilding and Engineering and selected a design known as the Type 2400. And the plan was ambitious. They wanted to build 12 of them.
Wow, 12.
Yeah, they laid the keel for the first one, HMS Upholder, in 1983.
Which is right at the peak of Cold War tensions.
Exactly, peak paranoia.
But building submarines takes a massive amount of time, and by the time they actually get the first 4 built and in the water, the geopolitical map completely shatters.
Right, because the Berlin Wall falls in 1989.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union collapses in 1991. So suddenly this massive armada of Soviet attack submarines that the Royal Navy was preparing to hunt, well, it effectively ceases to be an immediate existential threat.
The enemy just kind of evaporates.
Yeah, and the UK government initiates a massive defense review in 1992 looking for what they called the peace dividend.
They wanted to cash in on the end of the Cold War.
Exactly. They look at their spreadsheet and realize that maintaining 2 entirely separate streams of submarine logistics, one nuclear, one diesel electric, is just a massive drain on the Treasury.
So what do?
They make a draconian decision. They abandon diesel electric entirely. They declare a purely nuclear submarine force.
So in 1994, after spending all this time and money designing and building these 4 Upholder-class subs, they just stopped.
Yep.
They declared them surplus. They essentially tied brand new, incredibly advanced submarines up to a dock in the water and just walked away.
I mean, they placed them in care and maintenance, but yeah, the effect was the same. The Royal Navy had no use for them, which triggered a desperate global search for a buyer.
I was actually reading about this bizarre moment called the Karachi affair.
Oh, right, the Pakistan deal.
Yeah, Pakistan was on the verge of buying them. The deal was essentially done, but it fell through at the last minute because Pakistan opted for French Augusta-class technology instead.
Which left the UK scrambling.
So these 4 boats are just sitting there, literally gathering rust until 1998 when Canada enters the chat.
Right, because Canada had this ancient failing fleet of 1960s-era Oberon-class submarines that were literally falling apart.
They were practically antiques at that point.
Oh, absolutely. So they see these 4 barely used British subs and think they found the deal of the century.
But the transaction itself was completely unorthodox. They didn't just write a check and transfer funds.
No, it was wild. The published cost was 750 million Canadian dollars, structured as an 8-year, interest-free lease-to-purchase agreement.
Which already sounds like buying furniture on a payment plan.
It really does. But the actual financial mechanics bypass standard treasury allocations through a barter agreement.
A barter agreement for advanced weapon systems. I mean, what were they trading? Maple syrup?
Geography. They were trading geography for steel.
Explain that because it sounds crazy.
Well, the United Kingdom is a relatively small, densely populated island. If you want to train a massive armored division in maneuver warfare or, conduct live-fire artillery exercises on a massive scale, you run out of room very quickly in England.
You can't just go dropping artillery shells next to London.
Exactly. Canada, conversely, has vast expanses of open land. So Canada traded. The UK continued heavily subsidized access to massive Canadian Forces bases.
Like which ones?
Specifically Wainwright and Suffield in the prairies of Alberta for ground forces, and Goose Bay and Labrador for low-level flight training.
So the UK gets to use Canadian land to blow stuff up in practice.
Right. And the monetary value of that base access essentially offset the lease payments for the submarines.
On paper, that sounds like a brilliant piece of statecraft. You trade empty prairie grass for 4 modern submarines.
It looks great on a spreadsheet.
But this brings us to a devastating term used in the CDA Institute policy report. They categorize the Victoria class as an orphan class.
Yes, the orphan class.
Going back to my luxury car analogy at the beginning, this isn't just about the car being rare, right?
Yeah.
What happens mechanically when you operate an orphan-class submarine?
It is a nightmare. When you are the only country in the world operating a specific platform, you bear 100% of the sustainment burden.
Because nobody else is doing it.
Right.
Right.
Because the UK completely abandoned the Type 2400 program, the entire industrial ecosystem that created it simply evaporated. There is no global supply chain for spare parts.
So if a specific high-pressure ballast valve fails in, say, 2012, you can't just pull one off a shelf.
No, that shelf doesn't exist anymore.
The original Vickers factory that cast that valve might be a shopping mall now.
Literally.
And the metallurgy has to match the pressure hulls exactly to withstand deep dive pressures, right? You can't just use any metal.
Exactly. The tolerances are 0.
So you have to reverse engineer the valve, find some boutique foundry willing to custom cast a single piece of highly specialized steel, test it, and certify it.
And that process might take 18 months.
Meanwhile, your multi-million-dollar submarine is just sitting in a dry dock in Halifax, completely useless.
Completely useless. Furthermore, you have no allied nations to call for help.
Right.
Like if an American Virginia-class submarine encounters a strange harmonic vibration in a cooling pump, the U.S. Navy can immediately cross-reference that data with dozens of other subs in their fleet, or, with the British who use similar components, and they find a solution.
They crowdsource the problem.
Exactly. But with an orphan class, every mechanical failure is a novel mystery. You have to solve it entirely in-house. You shoulder the entire cost of research and development for any upgrades.
Which explains the catastrophic operational record.
Yeah.
I mean, these things were plagued with severe electrical issues, mechanical failures, and even tragic incidents almost from the moment they crossed the Atlantic.
It was a very dark period for the Navy.
And the CDA Institute report notes that out of the 4 submarines, Canada currently has only 1 that is reliably operational at any given time.
But
1 working submarine for a country surrounded by 3 oceans.
it creates a death spiral for the institutional knowledge of the Navy, too. I mean, if the boats are always broken, submariners cannot get the sea days required to train and qualify for their roles.
Right, you can't learn to drive a sub if it never leaves the dock.
And if you can't train new sailors, the veteran sailors just burn out covering the gaps. It's unsustainable.
So logically, you look at this situation, you look at this broken fleet, and you say, scrap them, throw them away, and wait for the new TKMS submarines.
That would be the emotional response, sure.
But looking at the defense capabilities blueprint, Canada is doing the exact opposite. They are currently executing the Victoria-class modernization project, or VCM.
Yeah, the VCM.
They are actively pouring massive amounts of money into these 4 broken boats. Why throw good money after bad?
Because of the brutal mathematics of military procurement timelines. I mean, even with Canada announcing TKMS as the preferred supplier in July 2026, and even with the government demanding an aggressively accelerated delivery schedule, aiming to get the first 4 boats in the water by 2034, there is a massive capability gap.
2034 is still a long way off.
And the new submarines will not be fully operational, integrated, and crewed until the mid to late 2030s.
So if they scrap the Victoria class now, they basically have 0 submarines for a decade.
And if you have 0 submarines for a decade, you lose the submarine service entirely.
How so?
You lose the tacticians, you lose the acoustic analysts, the maintenance engineers. They all retire or move to different branches. And you cannot simply restart a submarine program from scratch after a 10-year hiatus.
The knowledge base is just gone.
Exactly. The institutional knowledge takes generations to build. So to prevent that total collapse, the Defense Capabilities Blueprint outlines that Canada must spend between $500 billion and $1 billion simply to keep the Victoria-class breathing until the 2030s.
$1 billion just to maintain a pulse.
Literally just life support.
And the VCM project isn't just fixing leaks. The blueprint showed they awarded a massive contract in December 2023 for the design and manufacture of brand new galleys.
Yeah, new kitchens, basically.
Yeah. And looking at the fiscal years spanning 2025 and 2026, they are soliciting contracts for modernized periscopes, state-of-the-art air monitoring systems, and advanced data fusion capabilities.
It is an absolute engineering nightmare, honestly.
Cram all that in there.
Yeah, you are trying to take digital, networked, 2020s era combat systems and bolt them onto an analog 1980s era hull architecture.
Oh man, that sounds awful.
You have to rip out miles of old copper cabling, install fiber optics in spaces not designed for them, and somehow manage the heat and power loads of new servers using legacy generators.
So they are doing everything they can to just improve habitability for the crew and ensure some baseline level of survivability against modern threats.
Exactly. They're patching holes in a sinking ship while trying to install Wi-Fi.
We are desperately bolting new tech onto old steel just to keep the lights on. But that raises a big question. Why the sudden, intense rush?
What do you mean?
Well, for decades, submarine procurement was this political football that nobody wanted to touch. It was toxic. So why is the timeline to replace them suddenly being treated as a national emergency?
Right.
The answer, according to the CDA Institute, is that the water itself is changing. The geography that kept Canada safe is turning against it.
Right. Because for the better part of a century, Canada relied on a geopolitical concept that the CDA report refers to as the fireproof house.
I love that phrase, the fireproof house.
It paints a very clear picture.
It does. You are bordered by 3 massive freezing oceans to the west, east, and north, and you share a massive land border with the world's most powerful military superpower to the south.
so you feel completely insulated.
Exactly. The neighborhood might be burning, but the fire can't reach your house.
Geography provided this illusion of absolute invulnerability. But the global threat landscape has inverted rapidly. Well, the Indo-Pacific region has transformed into a highly dynamic, highly contested maritime domain. You have rising tensions over Chinese claims in the South China Sea and Taiwan. You have North Korea aggressively expanding its missile testing.
Right.
And this results in a massive naval buildup by almost every major power in the region. Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, they are all pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into naval power projection.
And Canada is a Pacific nation. They physically cannot ignore that buildup on their western shore.
No, they can't.
But the shift that truly dictates the submarine procurement, the one that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, is the Arctic.
Yes, the Arctic.
Because the ice is melting.
The Arctic is no longer a frozen, impenetrable shield. It is transforming into a navigable, active maritime military domain.
Which changes everything.
The CDA Institute explicitly highlights the increased aggressive interest from both Russia and China in the region. I mean, China has actually declared itself a near-Arctic state, which is quite a stretch geographically, and they are building massive nuclear icebreakers.
Wow.
And Russia has heavily militarized its northern coast and heavily relies on the Arctic bastions to hide its nuclear ballistic missile submarines.
And as the ice melts, the physical environment fundamentally changes how submarines hide and hunt, right? It's not just about surface ships being able to drive through the Northwest Passage now.
No, it's way deeper than that. The acoustic environment of the Arctic is completely unique, and right now it is in a state of chaotic flux.
What does that mean for a sonar operator?
Well, you have to understand that sound waves in the ocean don't travel in straight lines. They bend based on the temperature, salinity, and pressure of the water.
Let's break that down because this is the core of submarine warfare. How does the melting ice actually change the sonar picture?
Okay, so in a typical ocean environment, water gets colder the deeper you go, right?
Right.
And that bends sound waves downward into the abyss. But in the Arctic, because of the melting ice, you have a layer of relatively fresh, very cold water right at the surface.
Fresh water from the ice?
Exactly. And it sits on top of warmer, saltier water brought in by Atlantic currents.
So you have a cold layer on top of a warm layer.
Yes, and this creates a massive acoustic phenomenon called a surface duct.
A surface duct?
Yeah. Sound waves emitted by a submarine get trapped in this upper cold layer. They bend up towards the surface, bounce violently off the jagged, uneven canopy of the ice, and bend back down over and over again.
So instead of a clear acoustic picture, a sonar operator is just hearing a chaotic cacophony of sound bouncing everywhere, essentially masking the actual location of a submarine.
Precisely. And as the ice melts, thins, and breaks apart, it creates immense ambient noise.
From the ice itself.
Yeah, the physical sound of millions of tons of ice cracking and grinding against itself.
That's got to be deafening underwater.
It is. Hiding in that acoustic chaos is an art form. And Russian submarines are absolute masters of utilizing these thermoclines and ice canopies to disappear entirely.
And the CDA report points to a specific geographic vulnerability emerging here, which they call the Arctic donut.
The donut, yes.
What exactly is the donut?
It refers to connected regions in the Baltic, the North Atlantic, and the North Pacific that basically surround the Arctic. These areas are becoming increasingly contested, creating this perimeter of vulnerability.
Oh, I see.
If adversaries can operate freely within this donut, utilizing the acoustic chaos of the melting ice we just talked about, they can push their attack submarines right up against the North American continent, completely undetected.
They could use the Arctic as a secure transit route to threaten Allied shipping in the Atlantic, or even worse, position cruise missile-carrying submarines within strike range of major North American cities.
And completely bypass traditional radar early warning systems because they're underwater.
Right. Which brings us to a quote from the CTV News investigation that really stood out. The commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, Vice Admiral Dan Charlebois, bluntly called submarines the ultimate deterrent.
Deterrence is a psychological weapon, and the submarine is its purest manifestation.
Explain that difference.
Well, think about a massive surface ship, like an aircraft carrier or a destroyer. It projects power by showing you exactly where it is. It demands attention.
It's loud and proud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a submarine projects power by ensuring you never know where it is. It tells an adversary, I might be 10 miles off your coast right now. Or I might be 1,000 miles away. Are you willing to bet your fleet on it?
It's the ultimate bluff.
And the mere possibility that a submarine is in a body of water
Uh,
forces an adversary to completely paralyze their own operations. They have to dedicate massive amounts of ships and aircraft just to sweep the area.
so what does this all mean? If under-ice capability is the absolute pinnacle of defending this melting Arctic frontier, it triggers the most intense debate of this entire procurement. It absolutely dominated the Defense Hub Global Military Forums.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to ask.
Why on earth isn't Canada buying nuclear-powered submarines?
It is the inevitable question asked by naval enthusiasts, defense contractors, and geopolitical analysts alike. It always comes up.
It literally took over the entire forum thread. You have a user named Mehmed Beg looking at Canada's massive sprawling coastline, which is the longest in the world, by the way.
Right.
And he's arguing that diesel-electric is a total joke for that kind of distance. He insists Canada should buy the French Suffren-class nuclear submarines.
And then the forum administrator jumps in.
Yeah, an administrator named Yasser TR jumps in and points directly at Australia because Australia looked at the threat of China, scrapped their conventional submarine program, and signed the IUS deal with the US and UK to acquire massive nuclear-powered attack submarines.
A massive geopolitical pivot.
Right, so the forum is asking, Australia made the leap, so why shouldn't Canada?
And on a purely tactical level, I have to say, the argument for nuclear propulsion is unassailable.
Tactically speaking.
Tactically, a conventional diesel-electric submarine, regardless of how advanced its battery technology is fundamentally tethered to the surface. Eventually, it must run its diesel engines to recharge, which requires air.
You can't hold your breath forever.
Right. But a nuclear submarine generates its own power through a controlled fission reaction. It does not need air to run its engines. It is only limited by the amount of food packed into the pantry and the psychological breaking point of the crew.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. It can transit at 30 knots underwater for months, arrive at the Arctic, and sit silently under the ice cap indefinitely.
But then another user named Oldkopu enters the thread, and they are clearly tagged as a naval specialist on the forum. They drop a massive dose of logistical reality on everyone because it all comes down to the brutal math of nuclear operations, right?
Oldkopu brilliantly dismantles the fantasy of a small nuclear fleet, because the barrier to entry for nuclear propulsion is not just buying the boat, it is the astronomical cost of the entire surrounding ecosystem.
What do you mean by ecosystem?
Well, in naval deployments, there's an ironclad rule of threes.
The rule of threes.
Yes. To guarantee that you have one submarine continuously deployed and on station, you must own three.
Why three?
Because one is actively deployed, one is conducting workups, training, or in transit, and the third is in deep, extended maintenance.
Okay, so let's apply that to Canada. Canada has to cover 3 oceans, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic.
Right.
To maintain a continuous, credible deterrent presence in all 3 simultaneously, you need 3 subs on station. Multiply that by the rule of threes, and Canada would need a minimum fleet of 9 to 12 nuclear submarines.
And purchasing 12 nuclear attack submarines would instantly bankrupt the Canadian Department of National Defense.
Like, immediately.
Immediately. I mean,
Wow.
a single American Virginia-class submarine costs roughly $3.5 billion US dollars. And that is with the massive economies of scale of the U.S. industrial base.
Which Canada doesn't have.
Right. But the cost of the hulls is just the beginning.
Right, because you can't just park a nuclear reactor at a municipal dock in Halifax.
Exactly the point Oldkopu makes on the forum. You have to build nuclear-certified dry docks capable of handling a radiological incident. You have to establish a massive civilian and military nuclear regulatory oversight committee.
Which takes years to set up.
Decades, sometimes. You have to build highly specialized nuclear engineering schools to train the crew. You have to develop emergency response protocols for a potential meltdown in a major civilian harbor.
The infrastructure footprint is just colossal.
Given Canada's budget constraints, if they went nuclear, they could likely only afford a fleet of maybe 4 to 6 boats total.
Which means, utilizing the rule of threes, you might only have 1 or 2 submarines available to cover the entire massive coastline of the country at any given time.
Exactly.
So 12 advanced conventional submarines provide vastly more overall geographic coverage for a fraction of the total life cycle cost.
It's just the pragmatic choice.
But Oldkopu doesn't just stop at the math. They execute this brilliant piece of open-source intelligence myth-busting regarding a supposed American veto over Canada buying nuclear subs.
This is a fascinating rabbit hole. It really shows the power of the internet. For decades, there has been this pervasive rumor stated as absolute fact on the Wikipedia page for Canada's failed 1980s Canada-class nuclear submarine proposal that the United States has a binding legal veto over Canada acquiring nuclear submarines from third parties, specifically France.
Yeah, the story was always that Canada wanted the French Rubis-class nuclear subs in the 80s, and the U.S. blocked it out of spite or, a desire to control the Arctic.
But Old Vi actually did the archival digging.
They went to the primary sources.
They did. They pulled up the 1959 U.S.-Canada Agreement on Atomic Energy, which the Wikipedia article cited. Then, they tracked down the primary academic source Wikipedia used to justify the veto claim, which was a 1988 paper written by a researcher named Theodore Guillory.
And Oldby found out the internet had been repeating a total falsehood for decades.
A complete misreading of the source material. Guillory's paper explicitly stated the exact opposite of what Wikipedia claimed. It concluded that if Canada chose the French Rubis-class submarine, the nuclear technology could be transferred without requiring United States consent because the French reactor design was entirely indigenous to France.
So where did the veto idea come from?
The U.S. veto only applied to British technology because the U.K.'s nuclear submarine designs relied heavily on shared proprietary U.S. technology from the S-5W reactor program.
Ah, I see.
So Old Coupo proved in real time that Canada had the sovereign right to buy French nuclear subs all along.
It is such a cool moment of clarity watching an anonymous forum user correct the historical record like that.
It really is.
But ultimately, it reinforces the core reality. Even without a phantom U.S. veto, the staggering cost, the massive infrastructure requirements, and the desire to maintain sovereign control over their own platforms without relying on U.S. or U.K. nuclear engineers, well, it makes conventional submarines the only realistic play for the Royal Canadian Navy.
Which forces a massive technological pivot. Because if you are abandoning the endurance of nuclear power, but you still need to operate in the melting, highly contested Arctic donut, you need the absolute state-of-the-art in conventional propulsion.
You need a Toyota Prius that can launch torpedoes.
That's exactly the analogy used by CTV News to describe these new boats, the Toyota Prius of submarines.
I love that. Let's unpack the mechanics of this, because this technology is the magic trick that makes a modern conventional submarine viable against nuclear-powered adversaries. We are talking about Air Independent Propulsion, or AIP.
To understand the leap forward, consider the baseline. Historically, a diesel-electric submarine is fundamentally a surface ship that can occasionally hide underwater.
Okay, so it's a boat first, sub-second.
Right. It uses massive diesel engines to charge incredibly heavy banks of lead-acid batteries. To run an internal combustion diesel engine, you need immense amounts of oxygen and you have to exhaust the toxic fumes.
Which means the submarine either has to drive around on the surface of the ocean, or it has to rise to periscope depth and stick a snorkel mast above the waves to suck in air.
And snorkeling is the most vulnerable position a submarine can possibly be in.
Why is it so dangerous?
You are dragging a massive metal pipe through the water, creating a visible wake. You are running loud, vibrating diesel engines that acoustic sensors can hear for miles. You are pumping hot exhaust gases into the cold ocean air, creating a massive thermal bloom that infrared satellites can instantly detect. And your radar-absorbent mast is protruding above the waves, completely vulnerable to aircraft radar.
You are basically screaming your position to everyone in the hemisphere.
You are. But air-independent propulsion completely flips that vulnerability. Modern AIP systems, like those offered by the two major contenders for the Canadian contract, Germany's TKMS and South Korea's Hanwha, they do not rely on internal combustion when submerged. They utilize highly advanced hydrogen fuel cells integrated with modern lithium-ion battery banks.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this fuel cell. Because it isn't just a giant battery, right? A battery just stores power. A fuel cell is actually generating power on demand.
That is a critical distinction, yes. A fuel cell generates electricity through an electrochemical reaction, completely independent of the outside atmosphere.
So no snorkeling.
No snorkeling. The submarine carries massive, heavily shielded tanks of liquid oxygen and metal hydride cylinders storing hydrogen gas. The system feeds the hydrogen gas over an anode and the oxygen over a cathode.
And the magic happens in the middle, right? The proton exchange membrane, or PM?
Exactly. The platinum catalyst at the anode splits the hydrogen molecules into protons and electrons. The proton exchange membrane is designed to only allow the protons to pass through to the cathode.
And what happens to the electrons?
The electrons are blocked. So to get to the cathode and reunite with the protons, the electrons are forced to travel through an external circuit. That flow of electrons is the electrical current.
Ah, I get it.
And that current drives the main propulsion motor and charges the lithium-ion batteries.
And when the protons, electrons, and oxygen finally meet at the cathode, the only byproduct of this entire massive energy generation process is pure distilled drinking water for the crew.
There are 0 moving engine parts.
Yep.
There are no pistons, no camshafts, no exhaust gases that need to be aggressively vented to the surface. The entire process is virtually silent.
That's incredible.
It allows a massive submarine to generate significant propulsion power and recharge its batteries while remaining completely sealed and deeply submerged for weeks at a time.
Just like a Prius seamlessly switches between burning gas loudly on the highway and running silently on battery power as you pull into your driveway, these submarines use their diesel engines to transit quickly across the open Atlantic. But the second they enter a hostile combat zone, like the Arctic Donut, they shut down the internal combustion engines, switch to the hydrogen fuel cell, and go completely dark and silent.
It fundamentally alters the geometry of naval warfare. An AIP submarine can drift at low speeds, utterly silent, waiting in a choke point for a much louder nuclear submarine to transit past.
So the competition for this $100 billion Canadian contract essentially became a heavyweight bout between two titans of this exact AIP technology.
We best the best.
You had Germany's TKMS offering the Type 212 CD and South Korea's Hanwha Ocean offering the KSS Third. And on July 6, 2026, the Maple Leaf Navy magazine reported the final verdict. Canada announced Germany's TKMS as the preferred supplier.
But the internet speculation leading up to that announcement was just an absolute bloodbath of competing metrics.
It really was. The Defense Hub forum thread provides a perfect, unfiltered case study in how open-source intelligence tries to pierce the veil of classified military capabilities, and how often it just becomes entangled in aggressive corporate marketing.
What's fascinating here is how emotionally invested the users get.
Oh, it is hilarious to read. You have this user, S. Scott, who comes into the thread swinging a massive bat for the German TKMS sub. He makes these breathless, incredibly specific claims.
Right.
He says the TKMS Type 212 CD is going to dive vastly deeper than 700 meters. He claims it can stay continuously underwater for 41 days without surfacing or snorkeling, whereas the South Korean Hanwha sub can only manage 20 to 22 days.
He was very aggressive about it.
Yeah, he essentially dismisses the South Korean sub as a cheap, scaled-up knockoff of older German tech and accuses anyone who disagrees of being a paid shill for the Hanwha Corporation.
It is the classic escalation of an internet forum argument, completely devoid of nuance.
Huh.
But once again, our friend Olkipu steps into the fray with a highly detailed analytical breakdown to separate the physics from the brochure.
Old Kupu points out the massive caveat in that 41 days claim.
Right. The user highlights that TKMS's marketing material claiming 41 days of endurance actually includes periods of snorkeling.
Oh, they buried the fine print.
Yet, if the submarine is entirely sealed, deeply submerged, and relying purely on its fourth-generation closed-loop proton exchange membrane fuel cells, the continuous submerged operational window is roughly 3 weeks.
Which is still an incredible feat of engineering, but it isn't 41 days of silent running.
Exactly.
But Old Sipu also digs into the physical architecture of these two submarines and highlights how vastly different they are in their design philosophy.
Because they were engineered for entirely different operational doctrines. The TKMS Type 212 CD has a displacement of roughly 2,500 tons. That is a massive 65% scale-up from their legacy Type 212A boats, but it is still fundamentally designed for stealth and maneuverability.
And it uses a very specific type of metal, right?
Yes, it utilizes a highly specialized, non-magnetic, high-tensile austenitic steel for its pressure hull.
Why does it matter if the steel is non-magnetic? Does it repel torpedoes or something?
It repels detection. Well, the Earth naturally generates a massive magnetic field. When you drive a giant 2,000-ton chunk of dense iron and steel through the ocean, it warps the Earth's magnetic field lines around it.
Like a magnet under a piece of paper with iron filings.
Exactly. And anti-submarine warfare aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon, they drag a sensor called a magnetic anomaly detector, or MEDI-boom, behind them. The MEDI sensor doesn't listen for sound at all. It looks for that specific warp in the magnetic field.
Oh, wow.
But austenitic steel is alloyed with high levels of nickel and chromium, which alters the crystalline structure of the metal so it does not align magnetically. It drastically minimizes the submarine's magnetic signature, allowing it to slip through minefields and avoid Med-E detection.
It is essentially an invisible cloak against magnetic sensors, optimized for the shallow, heavily monitored waters of the North Atlantic and the Baltic.
Conversely, the South Korean Hanwha KSS III is an absolute leviathan. It displaces roughly 3,600 tons on the surface and well over 4,200 tons when submerged.
It's a monster.
It is not designed to be a nimble coastal hunter. It is a blue-water, ocean-going strategic platform. Old Kipyu points out that Hanwha chose not to use austenitic steel. Instead, they utilized high-yield structural steel, specifically HY100 or similar variants.
Because if you are building a 4,000-ton behemoth, you need structural rigidity more than you need magnetic stealth.
Exactly. You need the immense tensile strength of high-yield steel to absorb the massive hydrodynamic stress generated by the defining feature of the KSS-3, its vertical launch systems.
Ah, vertical launch.
Yes, the South Korean submarine is designed to carry and launch massive, heavy ballistic and cruise missiles vertically from the hull. Furthermore, because of its sheer size, it carries vastly more internal diesel fuel, giving it a reported transit range of 10,000 nautical miles.
And regarding the fierce debate over which submarine can dive deeper, Old Kipyu correctly notes that the true test depth and the absolute crush depth for both of these platforms are strictly classified Tier 1 national secrets.
Right, nobody on a forum actually knows.
The internet loves to speculate that the KSS Thur can dive deeper because it's massive, or that the 212 CD goes deeper because of the specialized German steel, but the reality is that zero verifiable public data exists to prove a decisive advantage either way.
And the forum also brought up a major geopolitical vulnerability regarding the South Korean bid.
Yes. S. Scott argued that Canada should never partner with South Korea for a $100 billion military contract because South Korea is technically, legally, still at war with a nuclear-armed North Korea.
The argument was pretty apocalyptic.
It really was. He said if a hot war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula or in the South China Sea, Hanwha shipyards in Jeoje might be targeted by missile strikes. Or the South Korean government would immediately nationalize all shipyard resources for their own defense, and Canada would simply never get its submarines.
Was that geopolitical anxiety a real factor for the Canadian government's decision, though?
Well, while forum users and armchair generals excel at catastrophizing geopolitical scenarios, the real deciding factors for the government procurement office were likely far more pragmatic and institutional. The Maple Leaf Navy reporting and the CTV News analysis strongly indicate that both the TKSMS and Hanwha submarines easily met the Royal Canadian Navy's baseline operational requirements for range, stealth, and under-ice capability.
They both passed the basic test.
Exactly. The decision ultimately hinged on three pillars: industrial offsets, aggressive delivery schedules, and the paramount importance of NATO interoperability.
Interoperability being the ultimate shield against repeating the Victoria-class disaster.
Exactly. Canada expects the first 4 TKMS submarines to be delivered ahead of a typical schedule, aiming for 2034. But the strategic masterstroke of selecting the Type 212 CD is that it is a shared multinational platform.
Who else uses it?
Germany and Norway are already jointly developing, building, and operating this exact same submarine.
So by choosing TKMS, Canada is intentionally locking itself into an established, heavily funded European NATO supply chain.
They are guaranteeing they will never be caught operating an orphan class again. If that same high-pressure ballast valve breaks in 2038, Canada doesn't have to custom cast it. They can pull one from a shared logistics depot in Kiel, Germany, or Bergen, Norway.
That's a game changer.
They can split the immense costs of software upgrades, share acoustic intelligence data seamlessly, and cross-train their maintenance engineers with key European allies.
Okay, so up to 12 highly advanced, deeply integrated TKMS submarines are on the way. But this procurement isn't just a one-for-one replacement of old hardware with new hardware.
No, it's a massive shift.
This represents a violent leap forward in capability that fundamentally changes how Canada is viewed by its adversaries and, frankly, how it views itself.
Tell me more about that.
Well, CTV News pointed out a startling historical fact. Canada has not possessed a naval land attack capability since the 1960s.
Wow, over 60 years.
But these new Type 212 CD submarines are being designed to launch long-range, precision-guided cruise missiles from the ocean directly into sovereign territory.
Consider the magnitude of that socio-technical shift. A submarine equipped with precision land attack cruise missiles is not merely a tactical weapon, it is a strategic asset with profound global implications.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for 60 years, the Canadian Navy has essentially been a defensive shield and an intelligence-gathering apparatus. Now, they possess the capability to sit undetected off the coast of a hostile nation and strike command bunkers or air defense networks hundreds of miles inland.
Let's visualize how that actually works mechanically, because it's not like the movies where they just shoot a missile out of a standard torpedo tube and it flies into the sky, right?
It is a highly complex ballet of physics. Typically, a submarine-launched cruise missile is encased in a protective capsule. It is ejected horizontally from the torpedo tube using a pulse of high-pressure water.
Okay, so it gets pushed out.
Right. As the capsule clears the submarine, it pitches upward and begins to float toward the surface. The moment the capsule broaches the surface of the ocean, sensors detect the change in pressure, the capsule-protected casing blows off, and the solid rocket booster ignites, throwing the missile into the air.
All while the submarine remains deeply submerged and immediately begins turning away from the launch datum to evade counterattack.
Exactly. Once the missile achieves altitude, the rocket booster drops away, small wings deploy, and a small turbofan jet engine takes over, allowing the missile to navigate using GPS and terrain contour matching to strike a target hundreds of miles away with pinpoint accuracy.
When you acquire that kind of devastating first strike capability, as Peter Jones from the University of Ottawa pointed out in that CTV article, you join a very small, highly select, highly lethal club of nations. And when you join that club, your allies start asking for favors.
This is what we call the burden of lethality. When Canada's primary allies, specifically the United States, the UK, or France, are planning complex coalition operations or, seeking to project overwhelming force in a volatile region like the Indo-Pacific or the Middle East, they will look at Canada's fleet of 12 advanced, highly stealthy, heavily armed submarines and say, "We need you to deploy these assets to the vanguard."
It forces a massive shift in Canada's traditional diplomatic and military posture. You can no longer just send a frigate to patrol a shipping lane and call it a day.
Right.
You move from being a passive observer or supporting logistics player to an active, lethal participant capable of initiating decapitation strikes.
And the CDA Institute report delves deeply into the psychology of this, utilizing the concept of socio-technical systems. They argue that it is not just about integrating the new technology, it is about completely rewiring the psychology of the institution operating it.
How so?
Historically, the Royal Canadian Navy has viewed itself unequivocally as a surface-based destroyer and frigate navy.
Submarines were just a niche side project.
They were an afterthought. The submariners literally piggybacked off the surface fleet's budget and infrastructure. But going from 4 chronically broken harbor-bound submarines to 12 state-of-the-art cruise missile-capable submarines fundamentally shatters that historical identity.
It forces an existential crisis for the Admiralty. Are they still a surface navy that just happens to operate a few submarines on the side? Or are they transitioning into a submarine-intensive navy where the under-ice capability is the crown jewel of their entire defensive strategy?
Exactly. When a significant portion of your capital expenditure, your strategic lethality, and your value to global alliances is tied up in the underwater domain, the entire culture, promotion structure, and doctrine of the organization has to pivot to reflect that reality.
Which brings us to the most critical, the most fragile, and frankly the most difficult component of this entire $100 billion endeavor.
It is.
The home front. Because buying the world's most advanced submarines is completely, utterly useless if you do not have the people to crew them or the domestic industrial base to maintain them. And the CDA Institute report highlights a massive, glaring vulnerability here, which they call the crisis of invisibility.
The Canadian Armed Forces are currently facing a severe systemic recruitment and retention crisis across all branches. It's well documented.
Very well documented.
But submarining is a uniquely demanding, inherently unnatural profession.
You are asking highly trained, highly intelligent individuals to climb into a sealed steel tube, submerge into an incredibly hostile, high-pressure environment, and live in extreme confinement for weeks or months at a time.
It's not for everyone.
Not at all. You are completely cut off from the sun, from fresh air, and from any communication with your family or the outside world.
It requires a highly specific psychological profile to thrive in that environment. You have to be technically brilliant, capable of maintaining complex mechanical systems under extreme stress, while possessing the emotional regulation to live inches away from 60 other people without fracturing.
And the CDA report emphasizes that the military's broad personnel policies completely fail to account for this. The policies are often designed by bureaucrats with the massive land-based army in mind.
They treat everyone the same.
Right. They simply do not adequately address the highly specialized, specific psychological and financial needs of the Navy, let alone the ultra-specialized submarine service.
If the Canadian government cannot figure out how to dramatically overhaul its recruitment, compensation, and retention strategies for a new generation of submariners, acoustic analysts, and specialized technicians, these 12 incredible machines will simply end up tied to a dock in Halifax, rotting away exactly like the Upholder class in the 1990s.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. That leads to the ultimate political challenge. How does the government actually sell this to the Canadian public?
That's a huge hurdle.
Because if we're being honest, for the average listener, the biggest, most pressing security threat in their daily life right now isn't a Chinese naval buildup in the Indo-Pacific or Russian acoustic dominance in the Arctic donut.
No, it's rent.
It is the cost of groceries, it is the housing crisis, it is inflation, and the domestic economy. If a government steps up to a podium and announces they are spending up to $100 billion on military submarines during an economic crunch, there's going to be immense, immediate political blowback.
The capability argument alone, arguing that Canada needs submarines purely for defense, has not won popular support or sustained funding in Canada for decades.
It just didn't work.
The government strategy, which is heavily telegraphed in the Maple Leaf Navy reporting, is that they must reframe this procurement entirely. They cannot sell it merely as a military necessity.
So how do they sell it?
They have to sell it as a massive, multi-generational economic prosperity engine.
You have to tie national security directly to domestic economic security.
Precisely. And they are doing this through a rigid procurement framework they call Build, Partner, Buy, Why. While they are buying an existing, proven design off the shelf from Germany, the TKMS Type 2 CD, they are heavily weaponizing the partner aspect of that framework. They are demanding the creation of a sovereign sustainment ecosystem.
What does a sovereign sustainment ecosystem actually look like on the ground in a Canadian city?
It means aggressively leveraging the contract to keep as much of the money, the manufacturing jobs, and the intellectual property inside Canada's borders as physically possible.
Okay, so it's a massive jobs program.
Yes, and the CDA report notes a fascinating leverage point here. Canada natively possesses 12 of the 14 critical minerals globally recognized as essential for advanced submarine construction and battery manufacturing.
So they aren't just buying the boats, they are dictating the supply chain.
The goal is to build an incredibly resilient domestic supply chain from the ground up. The government wants Canadian-mined minerals used in the battery arrays. They want Canadian-designed communication suites, sonar arrays, and electronic warfare support measures integrated directly into the German hulls.
And crucially, they want to transform Canadian coastal dockyards into cutting-edge global maintenance hubs.
This is where the NATO interoperability pays massive economic dividends. If Canada is operating the exact same TKMS Type 212 CD submarine as Germany and Norway, they can upgrade the dockyards in Halifax on the East Coast and Esquimalt on the West Coast to service that specific platform.
So when allied nations are operating in the North Atlantic or the Pacific, they won't have to sail all the way back to Europe for a refit or major maintenance.
Exactly. They can bring their submarines to Canada. It creates a perpetual, decades-long cycle of high-tech union jobs, massive university research and development partnerships for acoustic engineering, and a booming domestic manufacturing sector.
They are desperately trying to engineer their way out of the Victoria-class disaster by ensuring the industrial infrastructure, the factories, and the workforce exist organically before the new boats ever touch the water.
It is a phenomenal logistical, political, and economic tightrope walk. The government is attempting to secure the nation's melting maritime borders, completely redefine its global military footprint to handle lethal strike capabilities, and artificially stimulate a domestic industrial renaissance, all at the exact same time, under a highly compressed, panic-driven timeline.
It is truly a massive undertaking. So to bring this entire massive geopolitical puzzle together for you listening, Canada is finally mercifully closing the book on the disastrous orphan Victoria-class submarines.
It's the end of an era.
A tough era. They are desperately bolting new technology onto old steel just to survive the next decade. But the future is a massive pivot to a 12-sub fleet of TKMS Type 212 CDs. They are gaining lethal, long-range cruise missile capabilities that will fundamentally alter the Royal Canadian Navy's identity and global responsibilities. And they're attempting to rebrand this staggering $100 billion military expense as a domestic jobs, supply chain, and high-tech manufacturing boom.
And this matters to you directly. This is a staggering allocation of your tax dollars, likely the largest single military procurement in Canadian history.
Yeah, you're paying for this.
It represents a fundamental shift in how your country projects power, how it defends its sovereign territory in a melting Arctic, and how it is viewed by adversaries and allies on the world stage. But it also represents a massive potential transformation of the domestic economy, sparking high-tech manufacturing, deep university research and development, and highly skilled employment across the country for the next 40 years.
It really is a massive turning point in the history of the country. But before we wrap up, we always like to leave you with something provocative to chew on, something that pushes past the immediate headlines.
This raises an important question, actually. Consider a concept that builds on the CDA Institute's warnings about the rapid pace of technological advancement and fungibility, which is the ability of a multi-billion-dollar asset to adapt to unforeseen future threats.
Right.
Canada is committing up to $100 billion to lock in manned diesel-electric submarine architecture for the next 40 years.
That's a long commitment.
The final submarine in this fleet might not be delivered until 2038.
Okay, so what's the catch?
What happens if the entire nature of the ocean battle space is completely revolutionized by unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, and artificial intelligence by 2038?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a scenario where, instead of deploying one massive manned submarine, an adversary releases a drone swarm. Thousands of 3-foot-long, autonomous, AI-driven sensor drones spread out across the entire Arctic donut, creating an impenetrable underwater mesh network.
Wait, really? So you're saying a multi-billion-dollar TKMS submarine with all its stealth, its non-magnetic steel, and its silent fuel cells tries to sneak through the Arctic, and it gets instantly detected not by a massive sonar ping, but by thousands of tiny, cheap drones measuring the microscopic displacement of water as the hull passes by.
That is the billion-dollar gamble. Are we successfully building the ultimate incredibly lethal deterrent for the complex threats of the 2030s? Or, by the time the final boat is delivered, have we just bankrupted the defense budget to buy the most expensive, perfectly engineered, completely obsolete technology of the previous era?
That is a haunting thought to leave on. The spreadsheet is definitely broken, and the future of underwater warfare is moving faster than anyone can predict. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep digging into this topic, keep asking those hard questions, and we will see you next time.